As David already pointed out, we're going to be studying from 1st and 2nd Peter all week this week. And so I need to give you a homework assignment as we start. The more you read these two letters over the next 4 days, the easier it will be to follow as we study along. We are going to take the chapters in order and just kind of work our way through the text. I'm not going to cover every difficult question, and so I'm going to save all that stuff for David and Ryan. So if you want to know about Jesus speaking to the souls in prison in 1 Peter chapter 3, you can ask them because I have no idea what that means. But that's what we're going to be studying through the week, so I would ask you to be reading the material over, and that way we can study together, and hopefully you'll derive some profit. I thank you for the invitation to be here. I've been looking forward to being here. This is Auburn has a special place for me, this congregation, because I've been coming here for, probably 20, 25 years at this point. In fact, the first time I was in Auburn, y'all were still meeting in the old building. David Bradford was here. So that's how far back it goes. A lot of you college kids weren't even born at that point. And so, yes, that makes me old, and sorry about that. But thank you for having me back. I hope our studies are profitable. This is a Bible class this morning. And so, against my better judgment, if you have questions or comments as we work through this first chapter, the part of the first chapter, please feel free to make them. I do want to cover a certain amount, and so if we kind of answer your question or address your comment and then move along, please understand I'm on a schedule, and there's a clock back there, and at 10:09 I have got to stop, okay? And I've already had one comment, I won't say from whom, about long-winded preachers, and so I'm not going to go past 10:09. I do want an explanation for the week's over why it is 10:09. Is that like a war eagle thing? So at any rate, I want to look at the first 20 verses or so in 1 Peter chapter 1. I'm going to read them in a minute, but here's what I want you to think about as we get started. Let me do it this way. How many of you, by show of hands, have obeyed the gospel of Jesus Christ? Okay. Why? Why did you obey the gospel? For some of you, you're going to have to think back because some of you were like under the old law when you obeyed the gospel. And some of you, probably it's just been in the last couple of weeks because I know y'all do a wonderful job of teaching people here. But I want you to think about your motivation, because motivation is an important part of our service to God. And what happens is we obey the gospel sometimes for very specific reasons, but the next question is, what keeps you serving the Lord? My suspicion is you obeyed the gospel probably because you didn't want to go to hell. Is that true? One person didn't want to go to hell in the whole audience. You know, there's a degree of reward and punishment that we understand. In fact, it's kind of curious to me. We were talking in Bible class at home the other day. We're studying 1 Thessalonians, and we were talking in chapter 4 and 5 about the second coming of Christ and the judgment day. And there's a lot of people in the religious world, they don't want to talk about the judgment day. They want to talk about the return of Christ, but they don't want to talk about judgment. It's accountability that makes the gospel powerful, folks. And the idea of reward and punishment, I obeyed the gospel because I don't want to go to hell, or I obeyed the gospel because I do want to go to heaven, that's legitimate. There's not anything wrong with that. The idea of, well, we don't want fire and brimstone preachers. Well, we better have some fire and brimstone, because hell is not some place where people want to go. And I think for a lot of us, we obeyed the gospel initially because we recognized our standing before God and we didn't want to be punished for it. But I think over time what happens is our motivations change. Now, I just turned 62 last week, so I ain't a spring chicken anymore. I know that makes me unrelatable to all the college students. Please come back anyway, okay? Just humor me. But the reality is, over time, I don't think as much about heaven and hell, although I do think about those things. What happens is, as you grow spiritually, your motivation changes from reward punishment to regard. I really want to look on the face of God. I really want to spend time talking to my Lord. I am looking forward to the associations with those who have gone before and spending eternity with God's people through the ages. There's a lot of folks I want to talk to. I want to spend some time with Daniel. And so your motivations evolve somewhat. But at the base of them, there remains the concept of reward and punishment. So I want you to think about that. I'm going to begin reading in verse 3. And we're going to read down through verse 21, so it's a long reading. So open your Bible, follow along with me. And then I want to make some observations that Peter addresses about motivation, what it is that drives us in our service. So listen for that idea. This is written to Christians, by the way, so we'll forego with all the other introductory things, but Peter is writing to people that are already Christians, and he says, "Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who according to His abundant mercy has begotten us again to a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, to an inheritance incorruptible, undefiled, and that does not fade away, reserved in heaven for you who are kept by the power of God through faith for salvation, ready to be revealed in the last time. In this you greatly rejoice, though now, for a little while, if need be, you've been grieved by various trials, that the genuineness of your faith, being more precious than gold that perishes, though it's tested by fire, may be found to praise, honor, and glory at the revelation of Jesus Christ, whom, having not seen, you love, though now you do not see Him, yet believing, you rejoice with joy inexpressible and full of glory, receiving the end of your faith, the salvation of your souls. Of this salvation the prophets have inquired and searched carefully who prophesied of the grace that would come to you, searching what manner of time the Spirit of Christ who is in them was indicating when He testified beforehand the sufferings of Christ and the glories that would follow. To them it was revealed that not to themselves but to us they were ministering the things which now have been reported to you through those who have preached the gospel to you by the Holy Spirit sent from heaven, things which angels desire to look into. Therefore, gird up the loins of your mind, be sober, and rest your hope fully upon the grace that is to be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. As obedient children, not conform yourselves to the former lusts as in your ignorance, but as He who called you is holy, you also be holy in all your conduct, because it's written, be holy, for I am holy. And if you call on the Father, who without partiality judges according to each one's work, conduct yourselves here through the time of your stay in fear, knowing that you were not redeemed with corruptible things like silver or gold from your aimless conduct received by tradition from your fathers, but with the precious blood of Christ, as of a lamb without blemish and without spot. He indeed was foreordained before the foundation of the world, but was manifest in these last times for you, who through Him believe in God, who raised Him from the dead and gave Him glory, so that your faith and hope are in God." I'll be honest with you, we could spend all week just on this section, and it would be well worth our time. The culture that we live in is very much needful of the things that Peter says to us as Christians, and that's why we're studying that this week. But let's return to the concept of motivation. Why do we serve the Lord? I want you to notice that Peter emphasizes the concept of hope in this section. He introduces it in verse 3, "Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who according to His abundant mercy has begotten us again to a living hope." And then everything he says till you get to the next section where we finish reading really comes back to this idea of we are serving God because of our hope, because that's what God has offered to us. And so that's what I want to talk to you about this morning as we go through this little section. And the first point I want to make about it is that this idea of hope, this desire and expectation, that's the old traditional way of defining it, Hope doesn't simply mean I have a chance at going to heaven, and I think that perhaps maybe if I'm lucky that I get to go to heaven. There is the desire element, but there is also the expectation element. I'm going to tell you something, folks. As children of God, we need to have some confidence that God's going to save us. We need to live our lives every day knowing full well that if I die today, when I open my eyes again, whatever that entails in the spiritual world, I'm going to be with the Lord. And our younger folks need that concept in this day and age, and it needs to be well grounded. And that's what Peter does for us here. So here's the first thing he does with that. What is the first command in verse 3? Anybody just say it out loud. If you're wrong, I won't make fun of you for very long. Are y'all just not used to preachers coming to meetings and letting you speak?
To be born again.
Huh?
To be born again.
Oh, look back at it. Sorry, that's not what I'm looking for. But hey, thanks for, we're getting there. We're getting there. What's the first command? What's the first thing Peter tells them to do? Huh? Bless God. Okay, now it doesn't sound like a command, but that's exactly what Peter is saying. God is to be blessed. Before we get to the born again part, which is where we're going, this is where Peter starts, and this is what hope ought to do for us. The fact that we not only desire to go to heaven, but we expect to go to heaven, ought to cause us to have some degree, some great degree of appreciation for our God. And I don't know that we think in these terms all the time. Maybe you do. If you do, that's wonderful. But when Peter begins this, the first thing he says is, God and His activity needs to be acknowledged by us. We need to recognize that we are who we are and we have what we have. We have this living, dynamic, active desire and expectation for a reward, not because of ourselves, but because of God. And God is to be blessed. And I want you to notice, first of all, in verse 2, why? Or verse 3. God is to be blessed who, first of all, according to His abundant mercy, begot us again. So think about mercy for a second. We live in a day and age where a lot of people want to talk about grace, about God's disposition and the things that God has done. He's writing here to people that are Christians. Grace has been offered to all men, Titus chapter 2. God's expression of grace is seen in Jesus Christ dying on the cross. And the sum total of things that God has done for our salvation. But mercy is God's disposition towards His people. God's not going to look at you and I as Christians on the day of judgment and judge us based upon what we deserve. He looks at us and judges us based upon the fact that we have a relationship with Him and He is going to extend mercy toward us. And we need to appreciate that we live in that kind of environment with God, that's what He is underscoring. God looks at His people and He has compassion on them. God looks at His people and He has pity on them. God looks at His people and does what He can to save them. And so the idea here is we need to be aware and grateful to God because God's looking at me different than He's looking at the rest of the unsaved world. Do you get that? And wait a minute. This is a yes or no question. I've been here before, and we've been through this before. Do you get that? This is yes. If you don't get that, then do this. I don't understand what you're saying. Because we'll just keep going on this one point till I get this. Yeah, I can wait you out. Do you get it that God's people enjoy pity and compassion from the Father? Okay. Even if you don't get it, just do this for me, okay? Do you appreciate that gift? Do you understand what that means for you? Do you consider how the God of the universe, with all of His power and glory and might and wisdom and majesty, looks at me and you, because if you're like I am, every day is not easy. I have my bag of rocks that I have to drag around and deal with, my temptations that I struggle with, and God still looks at me with mercy. And we've got to be grateful for that. That has to mean something to us. And he goes on. It's not only that our hope is based upon the abundant mercy of God, but notice that he says, now we go back to the original answer from the first question. What else does he underscore here? We are what by God? Somebody say it out loud. It doesn't say born again, unless you're reading a different version. What does it say? Begotten again. Do you understand the difference between being born and being begotten? We're very accustomed to the idea of being born again. John chapter 3 is always the one that comes to mind, Jesus and Nicodemus. You have to be born again. But born again is what happens to us, what we do. What's the emphasis of begetting? What the Father does. We don't use this term very often. Somebody mentioned my dad a minute ago, and I appreciate you remembering my folks and asking about them. My parents, my dad especially, begot me. Now, I was born to them, but my dad was the one who was performing the action of fathering. That's the way we would say it. And unless you're really old-fashioned and ask, you college kid comes into Auburn and somebody walks up and says, who begot you? That's not the way we talk, but we might say, who's your daddy, right? So that's the concept here, that God fathered us. When we gave our faith and our trust to Jesus Christ, what God did was God fathered us. What does the child have to do with the begetting? Not a thing. The child doesn't decide for his father to father him, does he? So the emphasis that Peter places is not upon the fact that we are born again. The emphasis is on, look what God has done for you. Look who you are because of God's activity. And once again, our hope is rooted in the mercy of God who's taken His people and has fathered them again. And that's where our hope is, and as a result of that, what Peter says is God is to be blessed. And he goes on to say the assurance of that is He's begotten us again to a living hope through what? Through what? Somebody say it out. I can't hear very well. Through the resurrection. Do you appreciate the practical impact of the resurrection of Jesus Christ upon you and upon me? It's not just a theoretical thing that says this proves that Jesus was the Son of God. The resurrection of Jesus Christ is the power of God manifested so that He can assure us that He has fathered us, He has made us His children, He has given us a hope, we enjoy His mercy, and He's done all that to prove Himself. I mean, should God have to prove Himself to us, folks? He's God. And yet the reason that Jesus was raised from the dead is so that you and I will know when I die, I can have hope that I'm going to be raised from the dead. He didn't have to prove Himself, but He did prove Himself because this lends power to the activity of God. And we need to underscore that. We need to recognize that this is not just some kind of a doctrinal, theological position that doesn't affect us and impact us in real life. We get up every day, we go to school, we go to work, we deal with our families, and we do so knowing full well that life has meaning because God, in His mercy, made us His children and proved Himself through the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And that should be meaningful. In fact, what it should do is prompt great appreciation for God. Look at the next verse. What is the substance of our hope? Well, it's an inheritance. Why would he use the word inheritance here when he starts talking about whatever hope entails? We'll talk about that in a second. Why use the word inheritance? What has he just told us God has done? He's begotten us. He's fathered us. And so what's the connection between a father and an inheritance? Yeah, an inheritance is what the father or the owner gives by right to his offspring. So, verse 4, our inheritance, incorruptible, undefiled, unfading, we get all of that. At least I hope we get it. After heaven in 1,000 years in a glorified, resurrected body, in association with God, in a world where there is no difficulty or sin or temptation or injustice, every day will be just as shining and bright and attractive as the day before. It'll never get old. It'll never fade away. It will never be corrupted. Nothing in this world is like that. And that should make that appeal to us. But what I want to appreciate about that is, this is our portion. In the Old Testament, remember the story of Jacob and Esau? This is yes. No. Do you remember the story of Jacob and Esau? Okay. What's the big conflict between Jacob and Esau when they are young? The birthright. Okay? In their culture, the older child received twice as much as the younger child. But it was their right by inheritance. Do you think of heaven that way? That this is where I belong, this is my right? You know, I think we really hesitate to think about God in those kinds of terms, but the reality is, this is what Peter says is ours. That God has fathered us to a hope that's alive, to an inheritance. This is what God's people get. And it's never going to fade away, and it's never going to be tainted, and it's never going to be destroyed. It is in heaven, and I can be sure of it because Jesus was raised from the dead. And then if you get to verse 5, he says one other thing that our Father does. And I wish I had a better explanation for this one. This remains somewhat mysterious, where he says, who are kept by the power of God through faith for salvation. The word kept there in its original language means something like garrisoned, or to set a guard around, to set a watch around. And what this means is, as I understand it is, God's watching out for us, and God's protecting us. Now, I don't know exactly how. There's room for a lot of speculation that gets way away from Scripture. We are told that no temptation takes us, but such as is common to man. We are told that God's eyes are upon the righteous and His ears are open to their prayers. We are told that we can come boldly to the throne of grace and find mercy in time of need. There's a lot of things that God tells us that He does for us, but He doesn't elaborate. And we need to be careful that we don't run off to some wild end about God protecting us and guardian angels and nothing bad. But I will tell you something we need to appreciate. God's watching out for us. However He is doing it, I need to understand that He is doing it. I've got 3 daughters. The oldest one just finished college, and we are moving her off in 2 weeks. And it's heartbreaking to me because I love my kids. But my whole life, I have spent the last 6 years, 30 if you count the age of my oldest one, watching out for them. I always knew where they were. I always knew what was around. I was ready at a moment's notice. Actually, 2 of mine are not married, and so you young men, they're good looking, they have jobs, and they have all their teeth. And so if you're interested, I am taking applications, so just come see me. But I want you to understand something. If you date them and you hurt them, I'm going to hurt you. Because what parents do is they watch. they look out for, they protect. God's doing that for us, folks. Don't know all the ways how. But Peter says that He is. Now, here's the conclusion of all this. And I've only got like 12 minutes left. Do you appreciate what God's doing for you? This is a 24/7, 365 enterprise here. And I want you to understand something about maturing spiritually. And for you younger people who are beginning your journey of faith, I want you especially to understand this. Your gratitude toward God is going to make a big difference in whether or not you stay faithful to God in your life. If your motivation never gets beyond the fear of hell and never gets to the point that what I am doing is I am blessing God for what He is doing for me, then please understand that there's just going to come a time when you're going to be overwhelmed. So Peter starts this off. If you get nothing else, and I don't apologize for taking most of the time this morning on this point. This is Peter's first point. God is to be blessed. And we need to get up every day of our life and live it in gratitude for our Father and what He is doing for us. Now, two more observations in this section. I know we read all the way down to verse 21. So here's the second point. Look at verse 6. In this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while, if need be, you've been grieved by various trials. The second point about hope is that hope ought to produce some joy in our life. And I don't mean kind of rah, better felt than told, let's ignore the realities of life and let's just be happy all the time. Rejoice in the Lord always, we sing. Well, what about when my loved ones die? What about when I'm stricken with cancer? What about when I'm disappointed? What about when I don't get in Auburn? What about all these things in life that disappoint us? Well, Peter says, look, in this salvation, in this relationship with God, you rejoice, even though for a little while, if need be, you've been grieved by various trials. The reality is, hope gives us something to be joyous about, even when there's a lot in life that causes us to be sad and grieved and disappointed and frustrated. There is a juxtaposition here between what we feel emotionally as we go through this world and what we know in our mind that God has done and is doing for us. And that's a challenge, because I'm going to tell you what disappointment and trials do for us. They make us real selfish. Those of you that are out of school, working, have been working, older folks, you ever go through financial up and downs? This is a yes or a no question. Okay, 3 people have, the rest of you. I'm giving up. I'm going home. Okay. You know what happens when you have financial problems? You lose your job. You have some issue. You don't get a promotion. What happens? You just think about that a lot, don't you? Don't you? Shake your head yes. Just shake your head yes for me. Make me feel good. Come on. The reality is difficulties. If you get cancer, what do you think about all the time? What's going to happen to me? I've got cancer. I have this horrible disease. Is it going to be curable? If it's not curable, how much time do I have? Parents, I have a child that's left the Lord. You think about that all the time? What happens is when life is difficult, we just think about our difficulties. I think the great temptation of difficulty is selfishness. Because we don't think about anything but the problems that we are dealing with, and we lose perspective. Go study the Psalms. David goes through this a lot, and where he ends up every time is he thinks himself and reasons himself back through to the blessings that he has in God, and that's what Peter does here. You may have a lot of trials in life. You may grieve for a lot of things. You may suffer emotionally. But don't you know what you have because of your hope? And what he says in verse 7 is that the genuineness of our faith is tried by these things. This is where we really find out that we trust God. That in spite of the difficulties and the challenges, I know what my Father has done, and the gross, the slag, all of the unnecessary things to my faith are melted away by difficulty so that my trust in God comes out stronger than it was. This is what hope does for us. But that's up to us to learn to think about what God does in the midst of all the difficulty. And then here's point number 3. Skip through the passage beginning in verse 8 down all the way to verse 13. Okay? What he does in that next section is talk about the salvation that God has been promising us, and here's another element to appreciate, that God has been revealing these things, that we understand the sufferings of Christ so that we can have this hope. Then you get to verse 13, and here's the therefore. Hope should produce some holiness in our life. And I want to leave you from this study with these thoughts. What is it that God wants from us? What should hope do day in and day out when I get up every morning? Well, first of all, he says, I'll change the way we think. Gird up the loins of your mind. Do you know what that means? When's the last time you got up and said, all right, honey, I'm girding up my loins. I'm headed to work. We don't use this terminology. We probably don't even fully understand it. Anybody understand the idiom? This is an idiom. Anybody understand it? Okay. They wore robes, garments, togas, long. And if you're running or if you're working, all that stuff gets wrapped around your legs. You get that, right? And so if they were working or fighting or running, what they would do is reach down, take their garment, and tuck it into their belt, which was their girdle. And they were girding their loins and taking away the things that encumbered them. So what the idiom means is you need to prepare yourself. And what he says is gird up the loins of your mind. You need to prepare the way that you think. You get up every day, and here's a challenge for us as Christians. You get up every day, you go to work, you go to school, you go do whatever it is that you do, and the first thing we do is set our mind for what's facing us today. Whatever the challenges are, whatever the difficulties are, whatever life is like, and I need to do so remembering who my Father is, where my hope is, no matter what the difficulty is, that I have salvation waiting for me, that my faith is not subject to the circumstances around me, and I am preparing myself to be God's person. Gird up the loins of your mind. Be sober. The idea of sober is serious, okay? But it's serious because it's free from intoxication. Okay, I'm going to ask you a question. Everybody knows the answer to. When we think about sober, what do we think about that meaning that we refrain from? Alcohol or drugs, okay? Anything that intoxicates us, right? Do you appreciate there are a lot of things in life that intoxicate us? Money intoxicates us, doesn't it? You think about your job, you think about your work, you think about your retirement all the time. Ego intoxicates us. We think about ourselves and where we stand in our friend group, in the local church, in culture. I hate to say this, in Auburn, Alabama, the weekend before football starts, but SEC football intoxicates us. I'm going to make a challenge to you, and I am dead serious about this. Over the next 4 months, do not forget who you are just because it's football season. I love football as much as the next guy, but I'm going to tell you something, folks. There are a lot of things that intoxicate us to where we don't think about what we need to think about. where we don't set our minds and prepare ourselves. Resting our hope, he says, fully upon the Lord. And then in verse 14, 15, and 16, as obedient children, being holy, being set apart. For the college students, we're supposed to do a devotional tonight. And so here's your sneak preview. We're going to talk about holiness. And if you're uncomfortable with that, first of all, I'm not sorry. And second of all, I hope you'll show up anyway. Because where Peter goes with this is, as God's children, who have an inheritance awaiting us, who are driven by where we're going and what's ahead of us, our hope, we need to live like it. It doesn't matter who wins the next presidential election. It doesn't matter if Auburn wins the SEC or finishes dead last. It doesn't matter who has the best barbecue in the country. It doesn't matter if you get your doctorate. It doesn't matter about most things in life. What does matter is, are we living like God's children? Hope ought to drive us in practical ways about how we think and how we live. And that's the way Peter starts this book. And let me just tell you, as we go forward, everything we're going to talk about this week comes back to the concepts that are established right here. And I wish we had another hour. We could talk about all this in more detail. I'm sure you don't want that, but that's where we're going this week. Questions or comments? No? Let's do this one more time. Can you shake your head up and down? Just show me. Okay. Let's work on that, because I got to have your feedback or I'll just keep talking. All right? Thanks for your attention this morning. Hope those things are helpful to you.